Thanks to popular request, here's a video on how I make my freshly milled yeasted sandwich loaf. It's so good. This recipe is originally from Felicia at Grains and Grit. She's a great resource for everything related to freshly milled flour. But as with anything, I do the recipe a little bit differently, and so you'll see that reflected in my video. This is my family's favorite bread recipe. It comes together so quickly. It's delicious and nutritious thanks to that freshly milled flour. So stick around and I'll show you exactly how I make it. As with any recipe that includes freshly milled flour, the first step is to mill the flour. So I'm going to grab 6 cups of wheat berries and put them into my mill. Yes, we're measuring the wheat berries, not the flour. 6 cups of those. You can use hard white or hard red. Either work. I'm going to use hard white because I think that's what most people will use when they make their sandwich loaf. So let's do that. Flour is all done. If you're going to mill all of this into one bowl, you need quite a large bowl. This is a lot of flour. It surprised me the first time, but it does make 3 pretty large loaves, which is why there's so much flour. And I grind it on setting number 1 on my mock mill, in case you have the same. So let's get the rest of the ingredients and we'll get this into the mixer. I have my 4-cup measuring bowl. I'm going to fill it up with 3.5 cups of water. Warm it in the microwave until it's just a little bit warm to the touch, and then add 2¼ tablespoons of yeast. It is always my goal to dirty the least number of bowls possible, so I'm going to put this right in my mixer. And then I'm going to grab the yeast. What did I say? 2¼ tablespoons. I use this. Oh no. 1, 2, and I just eyeball 1/4. Oh, the baby is sleepy. I'm going to help him in one moment. Don't you worry. Okay, let that sit for a little bit. I'll be right back. It's time for someone's nap. At least I got the loud part out of the way. He is the sweetest, easiest baby ever. I've only been away from the camera for like 5 minutes and he is in his bed completely asleep. So let's get back to making this bread. We only have 3 more ingredients. I am going to grab my 1 cup measuring cup and get 1/2 cup of oil. I like to use extra virgin olive oil. I have also used coconut oil, but I like the results with olive oil better. And then I don't have to melt it either. I always put this in first because my next step is to add honey. So whatever kind of honey you have, add another 1/2 cup.
Mommy, we put it away.
Okay, I'll get that in a moment, buddy.
Right here.
Okay, thank you.
So you remember.
Okie dokie.
Mom, you might forget to put it there.
My son said, you might forget if I don't put it there, which is true. He knows I very quickly get distracted. Come on, honey. I was pretty confident I'd have enough. Ooh, I'm gonna push it. Okay, I'm gonna call that close enough. And I'll scrape that out another time. Okay, 1/2 cup of oil, 1/2 cup of honey into the mixer. And because I put the oil in first, it should slide out. Beautiful. The last ingredient is the salt. I use Redmond real salt. I like it very much. Let me grab my teaspoon. Did I say how much? It's 3¼ teaspoon. So again, I don't measure the quarter. 1, 2, 3, and 1/4-ish. This is what we're working with. Time to mix that up and add the flour. I like to keep my 1 cup scooper from measuring out the wheat berries because I use it for this part too. This is so much flour, I can't possibly dump it all in here. So I will scoop a bunch of it in, mix it a little bit at a time so it doesn't make a gigantic puff of flour. And eventually, when this big bowl is emptier, I can dump it in. And I will just keep going with this process until all the flour is in. I guess you could put all the flour in at one time and then just put the lid on the mixer. This is a Bosch mixer and it's awesome. It's a powerhouse. It has a huge capacity and it has a great lid that actually keeps stuff in. But I'm already committed to this, so I'll just keep going this way. Okay, I think I can dump the rest of this in. Okay. I'm going to grab the lid. 2-piece lid. Here's the shield part, then the actual lid part. Let me flip you around. I am going to mix this until it all just comes together, like all the flour is incorporated into everything, and then I'm going to let it sit to let that freshly milled flour absorb all of the liquid. Everything's incorporated well enough that I'm going to let it sit for a couple minutes. If I were to move ahead and just knead it and start making the bread, I wouldn't get the true consistency of the dough because the freshly milled flour has not yet absorbed all of that liquid. All-purpose flour absorbs the liquid much more quickly because it doesn't have the bran and germ in it like the freshly milled flour does. It only has the endosperm, which is just what white flour is. So I'm going to let this sit. I'll probably set a timer for 5 minutes. This is really easy to do if you're making a sourdough loaf because it won't actually rise in a couple of minutes of letting it sit and soak that up. But if I leave a yeasted bread too long in this soaking process or Autolyse process, then it starts to rise and then I'm knocking bubbles out, and I don't want to do that because yeast works much more quickly than sourdough does. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes and then I will come back and knead this. The kneading time is also much less because that flour has absorbed the liquid. It comes together pretty quickly, makes those gluten strands, and then I can move on to the next step. In those 5 minutes, I was able to clear my countertop and get dishes in the dishwasher and make myself a cup of hot chocolate. So now I am ready to knead the bread. I'm going to give you an above view and set the timer on my phone so you can see exactly how long I knead it and how it changes as I go. You can most definitely make this recipe without a Bosch mixer. It just makes it so much faster and easier because it's so powerful. So let's do this. We're at the 2-minute mark and I decided I'm going to check the bread. I'm going to check for the window pane test to see if it's stretchy enough to see through it, and I'm going to see how sticky and wet it is. This dough is a little bit more hydrated than some of my other doughs, so it'll be slightly sticky but not like stuck to your finger sort of thing. So let's check.
I want to check with you.
You want to check? So I'm touching it. It's not sticking my fingers. It's like sort of wanting to stick to my fingers, but it doesn't.
It
doesn't stick to your fingers either. Okay, and then I'm going to take off a chunk. I see. They're clean. And the window pane test is when you stretch the dough and you can see light through it, kind of like a window. So let's see how stretchy this is. It's tearing a little bit more than I would like. You can sort of see, oh, there you go. You can see through it there. I'm gonna knead it just a little bit more. So I'm gonna clean off my dough hooks here. Yeah, as I clean it off my dough hooks, it is sticking to my fingers, so. I don't know if you can see, there you go. So we're gonna knead it a little bit longer. I stopped it at 3 minutes, let's check again. Touch it, is it sticky?
Yeah.
Just a little bit, just a little bit, that's all right. Let's check for the window pane test again.
I'm gonna try.
Oh, Mommy's gonna do that, please. There you go. You can almost see us through there. Yep. Can you see light through it?
Yeah.
Yep. Thin enough that it can stretch and see light through it like a window.
Yeah.
Means the gluten is developed. So now I'm gonna pull it all out of here, make a pile on the countertop, and shape it into 3 loaves. The original recipe makes 2 loaves, but I think there's enough dough to make it into 3. These are just regular sized loaf pans. Maybe if you used a bigger loaf pan it would make 2 loaves, but these are standard, 9 by 5. I'm going to grab some oil to coat the inside so the loaves don't stick, because that's really, really frustrating. That has happened to me many times, is you lose a chunk of the loaf inside the pan after all this work, and you want some bread and it's stuck in your pan. Or if you plan to give it as a gift and then there's a hole in it, it's just really frustrating. There's 1 loaf pan. I just do this with my fingers. I have washed my hands, and you'll see me dump the dough out on the countertop, and I have cleaned off the countertops. I like to do this part right before getting the dough out because my fingers are oiled and the dough is much less likely to stick to me in any capacity. Last one.
Hi, Baba. I'm gonna see it myself.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Baba.
Okay, 3rd one's done. Now we're gonna get the dough out. Sometimes I flour the countertop. I think there's enough oil on me that I don't need to flour the countertop. I don't think it'll stick. So let's get the dough out. You can weigh this and make 3 equal loaves, but I never do. I always think I've eyeballed it well until they start rising, and then I realize they're not even close to the same size. Ugh. Get all the dough out.
Wait, I want to make it into a French toast.
You want to make the bread into French toast?
Yeah.
Okay. So here I'm gonna eyeball it there-ish. We'll see how that turns out. So I'm gonna get it into 3 chunks here. Ooh, this is a lot of dough. Okay. From here, I kind of smush it out into a rectangle about the same width as my loaf pan.
Let me here.
Oh, thank you, babe. I don't actually need a rolling pin. I just do it with my hands. Thank you, though. That's good thinking. From here, I roll it up this way. So I have that log, but then the ends are open and kind of ugly, so I fold the ends over on my bottom seam. And then I roll it so the seam part is on the bottom. I kind of pull the top over, and then I use the tension of the countertop, tucking my hands under and pulling it toward me. This creates tension on the top of the loaf and closes up that seam. There's where the seam is. So there's what my loaf looks like. See, the ends are tucked in, they're prettier now, and the bottom, the seam just goes in the bottom of the loaf pan. Like so. Let's do it 2 more times. I'll switch angles, maybe you can see more. Here's my ball of dough. I'm gonna squish it into a rectangle shape.
Flat.
Flat, yep. Close enough. I'm gonna roll up the dough. I have my ugly seam here on top and my ends, so I'm going to fold this over, fold this over, and then I pull the top over as well. Then use the tension of the countertop and pull it toward me. So this is my seam on the bottom, my ends. It's going in a loaf pan. One more.
Flatten.
Yep, flatten it into a rectangle.
Will help.
You want help? Okay. Now I'm going to roll it up. Here's my seam. Tuck my ends over. Pull it over the top, and then put your hand in there, sort of, under the bottom.
I'm gonna try.
Okay, tuck your hand under there, pull it this way. Okay. I have kind of a bubble here, so I'm going to actually do that again. Okay.
I'm try.
All done. There's our loaf. Put it into here.
I did help.
Yes, you did. And we'll move on to the next step. Here are my 3 loaves in the loaf pans. I have a wet tea towel here. I wet it with warm water, and I'm going to cover the loaves. I like to use a wet tea towel because it prevents any skin from forming on the top, and when I use warm water, it just helps create a little bit of warmth around the loaves and help them rise faster. So I'm just going to leave these here until they are about the height of the top of the loaf pan. I will come show you what that looks like when they are done rising. These have been rising for about 30 minutes, and I wanted to give you an update. Can you see how much this one has risen? I'm going to check the rise. Clearly this is the largest loaf because the other 2 are not as tall. Again, I'll never get the same size loaves, but here's how I check. So I'm going to push the dough, and if the dimple stays there, then it's done rising. But it puffed back pretty well, so that tells me there's still some rise left in it. The oven has been preheated to 350 degrees, and that's another thing I really like about this recipe, is that you don't have to set the oven temperature really, really hot like most bread recipes, and I can easily bake these while I'm baking other things in the oven. So if this happens to overlap with dinner time or I'm making something else, more than likely this can go in the oven at the same time. Basically, I like everything in my life to be really flexible so it fits in wherever I have time. Like I've said before, I have 3 kids, ages 4 and under, and so whenever I have 5 minutes of time, I like to make it work. So making this bread is pretty fast, pretty simple, and I can fit it into my lifestyle. A couple of the other things I do to make it easier for me is I will often mill the flour at any point in the day when I have time, and it's okay to be loud for a little while. Like while the baby's awake or while the kids are playing, I will mill all the flour and then let it sit on the counter. And then my mixer is not as loud, so I can mix that anytime. And then usually while the kids are sleeping or occupied, I will shape the dough because it's inevitable. When my hands are in dough and very sticky or messy or whatever, somebody needs me. So I can do that quickly while they're occupied, and then the rest is just letting it sit and throwing it in the oven. It's very simple. So if you're intimidated by baking bread with freshly milled flour, I think this is a great place to start. The oven is preheated and ready. I wanted to show you again how I poke the dough to see how it is rising. So here I am going to poke it just a little bit, not deflate it too much. Can you see my finger indent in there? It did not spring back very much. That tells me there is not much rise left in my bread, and so we are going to get it into the oven. This one's getting kind of gigantic. Those loaves rose for a total of 45 minutes before putting them in the oven. It's 350 for about half an hour. Again, the original recipe calls for 2 loaves of bread. I don't know if they're big loaves or if they're just meant to be really tall in the 2 regular sized loaf pans, but it calls for 30 minutes in the oven. because I have 3 smaller loaves, they're still plenty big, but smaller, I do 28 minutes and then check them. So I will see you back in about 28 minutes to check on the bread. This has been 28 minutes. I'm gonna give it that last 2 minutes to get the sides a little bit browner. The bread is out of the oven, looking golden and beautiful. I'm going to let it cool. What? No, golden and beautiful, silly goose. I'm gonna leave it cool here for at least 10 minutes, probably longer, and then take it out to put it on a cooling rack. Can you tell the children are awake now? The sides have gotten a little darker, a little browner since I took them out of the oven, which is a good thing, and one reason I like glass pans. So now I'm going to get them out of the loaf pans and onto a cooling rack. So I rushed those 2 loaves and got holes in the bottom, but I'm trying to get out of the house. So here's my last loaf. I'm going to use my butter knife and go around the outside and try to get it out without getting a hole in the bottom, even though I'm still rushed. But just know, if you let these cool for an appropriate amount of time, more than 15 minutes, then you will not get holes in them. Oh, this one's a little tough because it puffed out over the top. Let's see if I can pull it out. I usually just peel it away from the sides a little bit at a time. Ho ho ho! Nailed it. Here's my loaf, fully intact. Okay, most people put their loaves to cool like this. I always let them cool on their sides so that you're not compressing this direction and making your loaf denser. If you do it on the side, it helps keep that lift in the loaf. So this one looks pretty, those not so much, but it's just for our family, so whatever. I'm gonna let them cool like this, and then I will slice them, put them in bags, or we will just eat it.